Okay, so today I'm going to show you how I made this cement console table. So the first thing I did was cut down this 1x12 piece of rough pine to 5 feet long. Next up was cutting the 2x8. So I measured and cut the first leg and then used that first one as a guide to cut the second to make sure that they were both exactly the same size. So once those were both cut, I laid down the top piece and used the extra leftover piece of 2x8 to mark out how far apart I wanted the legs. Here I'm marking and pre-drilling the hole so the wood doesn't split. Once I did that, I awkwardly matched it up with the lines underneath, pre-drilled the holes again, and put in my screws to secure the legs to the tabletop. And there she is. So I needed a trestle piece for the middle to add some extra support. So I measured it out with a scrap piece of MDF trim and my clamps to make a guide for my circular saw. Once I had it all measured, I got the circular saw and got to cutting. Another pretty efficient way to do this is to have a foam piece of insulation on the floor, but I didn't have that, so I used what I had on hand. I cut it on my sawhorses, and with 10 inches left, the battery died. So I went ahead and sanded the piece that was already put together. This is not a necessary step for building the table, but my anxiety and OCD would not let me bring in a nasty piece of wood to the house, even if it was being covered with cement. So sanding away. 10 minutes of sanding later and my battery was charged enough to finish cutting the trestle piece. So I went ahead and did that. Then I measured the legs for where I wanted it to go. Pre-drilled the holes once again so the wood doesn't split, and I put the screw in just enough that it was coming out the other side. Putting the screw in a little like that is a great help when you're working by yourself and have less hands. Once I got it inside, I stained the trestle, but I didn't like the way it looked, so no sense showing that part. I mixed the cement to about a pancake batter consistency and started spreading it on. I used my plastic mud pan and my plastic hawk, which is actually a wallpaper smoother, but it did the job great and it cost way less than the metal ones, so I'm happy with it. Little by little, I put on a thin layer of the cement until I felt that it had good enough coverage. The corners can get a little bit tricky, but just take your time and you can cover whatever you missed on the second coat. So once it started to dry enough that it was turning a little bit light gray on the corners and the cement wasn't coming off on my fingers when I touched it, I went ahead and got a damp cloth and started to smooth out any of the ridges and the corners. You can see I'm doing that here, a light touch on the corners because it will pull off a lot of the cement if you push too hard. I left it a little rustic, but if you wanted it perfectly smooth, you could use a grout sponge and it would create an even smoother finish.